All right. Hey, folks, we are still here at ng-conf. I'm talking to Burke Holland.
How's it going?
Now, we've had you on the show on Adventures in Angular before, but you were working on Kendo UI. Now you're over at Microsoft.
I was, yes. We talked about Kendo UI. I think we've talked about NativeScript before.
Yeah, we have. I think we usually got TJ on for that, but
yeah, TJ Vantol.
Yeah.
I was at Telerik, and which was eventually being in progress, and then about June of last year, one of the members of the Bald community, the Bald community, John Papa called me up, and
I'm a card carrying.
Right, exactly, yeah, and asked if I would be interested in coming to the Azure team, and at the time I thought, not really, but then I went and did some investigation specifically around what Azure was doing with AI and ML and serverless and the quantum computing Microsoft was doing, and I liked the way the culture was moving, so I was like, oh, let's give it a shot, and it's been great. It's been great, a fantastic move. I'm glad I did it.
Good deal. Well, that's good to hear. We brought up Kendo UI, so I'm just going to do it real early.
Yeah, let's do it.
Kendo UI sponsored the interviews.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I did a demo today and still use the controls. I mean, as far as grids and spreadsheets and charts go, that's the kind of stuff you don't want to build yourself.
Oh, heck no.
Yeah. Somebody says you need a Gantt chart in this application. You have two choices. One of them is to just go back to college and get a different career. And the other one is to buy a Kendo UI Gantt chart, because you're not going to build that thing yourself.
Well, and it's funny, too, because people look at it and they realize that Kendo UI isn't free. And I'm like, yeah, but for what you pay for it, none of your engineers, in the time that because usually it's like a week or 2 weeks worth of pay for somebody, for one of your engineers. They're just not going to be able to give you what Kendo UI gives you in 2 weeks.
Oh, man.
Not even close.
Scott Hanselman has this thing where he says, and this was back in the days when you had to buy date pickers. Now, of course, they're all free, but he has this thing where he talks about telling a developer, you have 2 hours to build this date picker, or I'm going to buy one from Telerik, because that's about the cost. And there's no way you can build a date picker in 2 hours.
Well, and even if you get something together, it's not going to be as battle worn and things like that.
Yeah, right. Bug free and polished.
Yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, just a big thanks to them for sponsoring.
Thank you, Kendo UI.
Yeah.
So generous.
All right. So I do want to dig into what you're here for. So when are you speaking?
I spoke right before this from 11 o'clock, 20 minutes.
Oh, good deal. What was your talk on?
I did a talk called VS Code Can Do That, about tips and tricks and things that people might not know that VS Code can do.
Right. That's awesome. And we've had interviews with like Chris Dias and a few other folks on the show. I tend to pull those interviews off of JavaScript Jabber and go, these people will like this too, and I give it to them. So I'm planning on doing some of that at Build in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, are you going to be at Build doing podcasting?
Build.
Nice, I'll be there too.
So yeah,
it's going to be a party. There's going to be a lot of folks there.
Yeah,
a lot of folks from the community. I know we're going, so I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah. So this interview is about me, but I'm going to take a minute. So I got to know the guys from .NET Rocks a few years ago.
Carl Franklin
and Richard Campbell.
That's right.
And it was interesting. They, what was it, like 3 years ago for Build, they got some kind of deal together where they were going to bring podcasters out to talk about mobile stuff to promote Azure.
Right.
And so Microsoft gave them a budget, and they reached out to me because we have an iOS development show on devchat.tv.
Okay.
And so anyway, that all kind of worked out, and we went out, but they also brought out JavaScript Jabber. And so for the last 3 years, I've been going to Microsoft events and interviewing the JavaScript folks over there. So,
nice. That should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it should be good. I think I got a commitment from John Papa that we were going to get video of him petting puppies at Build.
Petting puppies?
Yes, he said they were going to have puppies to pet.
I don't know about that, but could be. I don't know. That just seems weird. It's an odd request from John. Like, I'll need a MacBook Pro and an HDMI adapter and puppies to pet. That's what I require to speak.
Yep, absolutely. So
I'd be down for that, though, especially if they're pug puppies.
There you go.
A large litter of smushed face pug puppies.
Anyway, so yeah, we were joking around about that on the live Adventures in Angular yesterday. But anyway, so VS Code.
Yes, you've heard of it.
I've played with it a bit.
This is not your edit? You don't use VS Code?
You know what? There's Emacs, and then there's everything else.
This interview's over.
I know, right?
Yeah, VS Code is a remarkable thing. I was at Build in 2015 working for Telerik, and we were there. We had a booth, and I was at the booth, and so I wasn't allowed into the keynote.
Right.
But there was an overflow room, and I remember they announced it at Build, and they did a demo, and I thought to myself, who the heck is going to use that thing? That is not
thinking the same thing.
That is not anything.
We need another one?
Right. We have Atom, we've got Sublime Text, we've got WebStorm, and I was still using TextMate at the time, and I was like, we don't need the text editor is a solved problem on Mac. Fast forward to 2018, and it's taken over. I mean, you go to React conferences.
Oh yeah.
VS Code. Vue conferences, VS Code. Angular conferences, it's crazy. And what's really interesting to me is that Microsoft didn't really know those communities, and yet was able to create an editor that apparently filled a niche. And so part of my talk is looking at what is it about VS Code that is so appealing to people. That it has supplanted all these other editors, which is not an easy thing to do.
Right.
Asking someone to switch their editor is basically like saying, hey, your house, it's nice. How about moving over here to this house? Like, nobody wants to move. You can't just make me trade out my editor.
Nobody can take my Emacs away.
That's right.
But yeah, it's really interesting. I think one of the things that has really made it just terrific, especially for JavaScript compiled languages like TypeScript and things like that, is just it incorporates that TypeScript runtime and just provides terrific tools if you're doing anything JavaScript-ish. The other thing is that since it's all written in Electron in JavaScript, it kind of opens a lot of opportunities for people to extend it with JavaScript.
Yes.
And so you get, if somebody wants a tool that's a little bit different, boom.
You can just make one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the really, and maybe you made a good point. So maybe the sort of trajectory of VS Code and the trajectory of TypeScript, like if you laid those two things on a graph, there may be correlation there. I know that I switched from Sublime to VS Code when I was on the NativeScript project and we were using TypeScript. And I was having a lot of trouble just getting it to TypeScript to just compile and work in Sublime Text. And then when I went to VS Code, like it just worked. Like I didn't have to do anything at all. And I was like, oh, this is way better.
Yeah.
There's just no comparison. So I think that those two things might be very closely related. To your point about being able to extend it, I would agree that that's also another very powerful thing because it is just a JavaScript. It is just an Electron shell. And if you don't know this, for the viewers, you can go to the command palette in VS Code and you can open the Chrome Developer Tools on VS Code. So if you go to VS Code Command Palette, you type Developer Tools, it'll open the Chrome Developer Tools in VS Code, and you can just see the innards, if you will, of VS Code, which is kind of neat.
Yep. Yeah, anyway, it's just terrific tool. One other thing that I found with VS Code that I really like is the Docker extension.
Yeah, that's a great one. We did that one this morning in the session.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good things about it. Docker, I mean, it's simple enough on its face, and if you really want to go edit a Docker file, you can, and it's not terrible. But VS Code just makes a lot of that automatic. It's like, I need a Docker container. I need this, and this. Boom, done.
Right. Yeah, because with the Docker, because VS Code is really just so for people who don't know, the extension for Docker is just really a wrapper on the Docker command line.
Right.
But on the command line, you got to pass all these flags, you know, all this stuff.
Yeah.
But in VS Code, you just right click. It just shows your images and containers. You right click tag, right click push, right click start stop, right click attach a shell. You can see what's inside. You can even debug the container. You can put a breakpoint in your container, and VS Code will just break inside the container. So I think that this idea of putting a visual tooling on top of something like that just makes it more accessible to people who don't have or have not yet learned all of the command line flags for Docker. I know I have not, but I can use that VS Code extension.
Yep. Well, and the other thing, just to dive into a little bit more, and I've been on this kick about automation for a couple of months, and I just can't talk enough about it, but the extensions for things like Azure, AWS, I haven't played with Google Cloud Platform from Visual Studio Code, but those two, they've got really terrific extensions for that.
Yeah.
And so it's almost seamless just to deploy stuff to those.
Right. So, and that's the idea. Microsoft's smart, and so they know that VS Code is very popular. People like it a lot, and so what they want to do is just make the on-ramp to the services, specifically in Azure, just seamless.
Yep.
So there's an app service extension for VS Code. There's a Cosmos DB extension for VS Code, which we also did this morning. You can attach to any MongoDB instance. So you get a MongoDB admin tool right inside of VS Code.
Yep.
There's a serverless extension for Azure Functions. There's a blob storage extension for Azure Storage.
Yep.
It's just really well integrated so that, it sort of brings Azure into your editor instead of it being sort of a black box that sits out here and you have to guess.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the deal, right? Is we want it to be as automatic as possible. And what that does is it's not just about, oh, well, I don't want to think about that. I just want to write code, which is part of the appeal, right?
Yes.
But it's also, hey, every time I got to deploy this, it just happens the right way, the same way every time. I get that consistent experience.
Right. And I think a lot of, it's specifically with the cloud, we tend to deal with things in the cloud like they are non-debuggable black box things where you run a command line, command, you execute it, and something happens or it doesn't happen, and maybe you get back an error, you don't. And so what Microsoft's been trying to do is to just make that a very visual, natural experience so that if you do get errors, it's very well formatted, you get the right visual cues, you know what's going on as if you were working on the server locally.
Yep.
Which is really what we want as developers.
Yep, absolutely. So, So how do you get that across in 20 minutes?
Oh, man. This morning we did, so I'll run through the tips that we did this morning. So I usually go over Emmet because that's one that a lot of people that are coming into the industry that are new don't know. And that's just a shorthand productivity tool. But Emmet can also do interesting things like it can update your image size. So you have an image tag in your project, and you specify the source to a local image. You should also specify the width and the height because then the browser will reserve enough space on the page and your page doesn't jump around. But where do you get that width and the height? You have to go look at the image, right? Visual Studio Code can tell you, or you can just from the command palette say update image size and it will just insert automatically the size for your image. Yeah, without you having to look anything up. It will do math inline, so you don't need a calculator. You can just type out an equation and just hit the command palette, type math, evaluate expression, it'll just do that for you. So that's good. Prettier is a fantastic tool that I think more Angular developers are using now, which is just an automatic code formatting. So if you have double quotes or single quotes, tabs versus spaces, what line you put your brackets on. Some people are not using semicolons these days, right? So you can set Prettier up to respect those rules, and then when you save the file, it formats the document. So it automatically changes your quotes, puts semicolons in the right place, puts brackets on the right line, and that means the code for your whole team looks universal.
Yep.
So we do that, and then we talk about debugging, how to debug Angular apps inside of Visual Studio. We did Visual Studio Live Share, which is a really fun feature. You've heard about Live Share?
Yeah, I was at Connect when they announced it.
Okay, yeah, so you know. And this is in preview, coming out hopefully very soon. But this
please.
I know, we all want it.
I keep seeing it, I'm like, I just want it.
I know. I actually saw a tweet from David on the VS Code team this morning. He's like, so pleased to announce the official launch of Live Share today. And I caught in my breath and I was like, oh, it's here. And then it said for Linux. And I was like, oh, okay. Still not ready.
Yeah.
But the idea is, and you can sign up for early access preview today just by Googling Visual Studio Code Live Share and requesting access. But that you and I can collaborate. So if you have a window, a VS Code window, you send me a link and then I see exactly what you see. I can change the file. I can save the file. I can add breakpoints. So just a better way to pair program than opening up a Skype call and sharing your screen and doing all that stuff. So that's super exciting.
The other thing is that you don't have to set it up on your machine in order to run it.
Right. There's no setup required. Right. You don't have to pull a project down from GitHub.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
NPM install, cross your fingers.
Isn't that because that's always the case? Like somebody's like, "Hey, can you take a look at this for me?" And the person's like, "Yeah, sure. Where can I get it?" And then I'm like, "Oh crap, they're gonna have to go to GitHub.
Yep.
I have to make sure they get the right version of Node installed. Did I put all the packages in there correctly? Knowing me, probably not."
Yep, absolutely. So I've also been trying as part of these interviews to get help people get to know the speakers a little bit better. So outside of Angular, outside of work, outside of code, what's your life like?
Oh, when I'm not
Yeah.
slinging the codes. Oh, nobody's ever asked me that before. Well, I'm a father. I have 3 boys.
That'll keep you busy.
It does. That's a full-time job, and I do enjoy it. We have a lot of fun. My oldest one really likes to play Texas Hold'em, so we play penny poker with his brothers. He's 14.
Okay.
So that's a lot of fun. Then I have twins that are 12. They're into various things. I've got one that's really into stocks and trading, so he's trading penny stocks. I let him use Robinhood, and he puts his allowance money in there, and he trades penny stocks. And I've got one that's really into plays the violin. And he's really into that. We live in a small town, and so he takes his violin down and he plays on the street corner for money. And it's a touristy town, so he's young, he's a cute kid, and so he's not really good at violin, but he'll make like $60 to $100 just standing on the street corner. So that's always fun.
Nice.
I'm trying to think. I knit a lot these days. My coworker Brian Kettleston, my wife had bought me some knitting supplies. I wasn't sure what to do with them because I don't know how to knit. And my coworker Brian Kettleston said, "Oh, just buy a circular hat loom." And for anybody watching, you can do this. They're like $15 on Amazon. You get
I was going to say, those I've done stuff with.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anybody can do this, and you buy yarn, and you can make hats with this circular loom just by watching a 2-minute YouTube video.
Yep.
And it's just I tweeted this the other day, but knitting works the same part of my brain that Lego does, and it's the same part of my brain that code does. You're building something line by line.
Yep.
And it's nothing but a ball of garbage when you start, but when you end, you have this thing that you've created. And I think that that's just very interesting. I think that knitting is very close to engineering. It is engineering in just about every way. So that's been fascinating for me. It's also really cool to go to the knitting store, and that there's a lot of old ladies in there that are in there knitting, and I'm always the only guy in there, but they love to see me come in there. They know me well. So every time I come in, they're like, "Oh, we have some new yarn. I think you're going to like this one," because they know I like the big soft stuff. But so that's been fun. That's what I do when I'm not working.
Nice. My buddy Derek Bailey, he used to work at Telerik.
Yes, I know Derek well.
He does crochet. So
yes, he does. Yeah, he's actually really good at crochet. He's crocheted some very impressive pieces.
Yep. Yeah, some of the stuff that because we used to do video call every week on YouTube for Entre Programmers.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
When's the last time you talked to him? Has it been a while?
It's been quite a while.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Derek, we miss you.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, so oh, look, I crocheted the Kendo UI Ninja dude. Yeah.
Which, for people that haven't not knitted or not crocheted, that's not easy.
Yeah, he makes up his own patterns.
Yeah, he does.
Dang.
I know. It's easy to knit a hat. I mean, it's just a circle, but knitting actual characters and stuff is hard to do.
Hey, look, it's BB-8.
I know. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, he's got quite the skill.
Yeah, good deal. So what were some of the things that you couldn't get into your talk just due to time?
Oh, man, that's a good one. I didn't get in, now that I think about it, we did not get in the Cosmos DB extension, which allows you to connect to any MongoDB instance as well, which is really fascinating. We were not able to get into app service and deployment. So how do you, from Visual Studio Code, create a complete continuous integration pipeline? So if you have an Angular app and I've shown you now how to put it in a Docker container. Well, now what?
Yep.
Right-click deploy Docker container is not a sustainable way to deploy applications. Right. And so we look at how to take a Docker container and put that into the Azure Container Registry, and then set up a process so that every time you check code into GitHub, it gets pulled out, the container gets built, gets stuck in the registry, and then gets pulled into app service, and all of that just happens.
Yep.
And there's nothing that you have to do besides check code in. So that's a good one. That one is, a little bit more in depth. We did not get a chance to get into that one. We didn't get a chance to look at any of the serverless stuff that you can do with VS Code, where you can build serverless functions locally and you can debug them, which includes blob triggers. So you can put a file in Azure and it will break inside of VS Code because VS Code can talk to Azure and knows. And then when you're done with that, you can just take and deploy that up to Azure, and your function just runs, right? There's no configuration on your part. It just runs.
Yep.
I think that's one of the more unknown features of Azure. I
can tell you, having set up a couple of AWS Lambda functions, Yeah, the debugging process is, crap, that didn't work. What's in the log? Okay, that's kind of useful.
Right. It's just a complete...
How to deploy a new version.
Yeah, I mean, serverless without debugging is so
it's so
insanely frustrating, and it's
Yeah.
really like it's like a throwback to the
Yeah.
early '80s, right? Like you're just
Yep.
going to shove a punch card into a machine and pray,
Yeah.
which is a shame because that's not
Yeah.
all the benefit. Like your function only costs you 10 cents a month to run, but it took you 6 months to build it because
Right.
you can't. There's no your productivity shot.
Yeah,
So-
in fact, that feature alone has been something that I've actually been looking at switching my Lambda functions over to Azure Functions just because I can debug it on my own freaking machine.
Yeah, for the local debugging. Yeah, that's one of the strengths that Azure definitely has in that department. So we didn't get a chance to get into that. We did not. We usually look at how to work with file storage because that's always an issue. I mean, like if you're going to upload files and things like that, and how you can work with those from inside of the editor. There's a site that people can go to. You can go to vscodecandothat.com, and it contains all of the tips and tricks. Sarah Drasner and I put this site together, and it has all of our tips and tricks in short little 1 minute or less videos with no sound. So you can just watch those, and we're constantly adding more stuff to it. Finding extensions we like, extensions like Settings Sync. So when you get your VS Code all customized, you can run the Settings Sync extension. Takes all your settings, packages, theme, icons, prettier settings, ESLint settings, sticks those in a gist, and now you can give that gist to someone, and it will just immediately make their VS Code instance look just like yours. This is great for teams. Excuse me, because when you have new people that are hired in, you can just give them this gist, and their setup is immediately up to speed. There's one called Bookmarks that we didn't get a chance to get into. That's on the site. That's another fabulous extension for just speeding up how you can move around inside of your code in massive projects by dropping these bookmarks that you can just seamlessly move between. Just a fantastic extension. So a lot of extensions. VS Code, when I interviewed, we have a show called 5 Things. Can I shamelessly plug 5 Things?
Absolutely. It's pretty funny. I've seen John Papa and Ward Bell do.
Yes.
do
Yeah. He does some of the episodes sometimes. So I had a chance to interview Amanda Silver, who is I think she's the VP or GM. Anyway, Code is in her organization.
Yeah, Code, TypeScript.
Yes.
We did an interview with her at Connect in November.
That was one of my favorite interviews just because the show's a little sarcastic, and she has such a great personality for that show. But she talks about, I asked her in that interview, I said, why do we need another text editor? And she said, well, we saw that there were text editors out there, but there was a sort of a space that was open for an editor that could stand between being a text editor and being an IDE.
Yep.
One of the drawbacks, Visual Studio Classic, for people who haven't used it, one of the things that makes Visual Studio so amazing is that it's an IDE. It's full on. So, I mean, everything you need is right in there. One of the drawbacks is that one point in time, I think it was like a 6 gig install.
Yeah.
So people begin to think of IDEs in terms of this giant, and so there was sort of a rebellion, and people were like, I just want the text editor.
Yep.
I don't need your tooling. So I think one of the reasons why VS Code has been so successful is that's how it starts.
Right.
So small install, it starts up very quickly, but then because of extensions, you can just begin to plug in just the parts of the IDE that you need.
Yep.
Or you can take them off at any given point in time.
Yep.
So it allows you to really customize it to being somewhere between a text editor and an IDE, and how much of that is up to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're kind of at the end of our time. Real quick, if people want to see what you're thinking about these days, I'm assuming you're on Twitter.
I am on Twitter. They can
you
follow
blog?
me. Yes, I blog in several different places. Not on my own blog anymore because nobody reads that. So I blog on CSS Tricks, occasionally in Smashing Magazine. Lots of times about VS Code, Free Code Camp, places like that. On Twitter at Burke Holland. I do need more followers so I can stay ahead of Asim Hussein. He and we have a contest running. And plus my self-esteem is low, so I tend to base it on things like arbitrary numbers like Twitter followers. Things that don't matter.
Yep. Yeah. So everybody follow Burke and send him hugs on Twitter.
That's right. I need it for my family will thank you.
All right. Good deal. Well, thanks for coming and talking to us for a few minutes.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.